your permit and fee matrix again?
Yes, and it's actually already in the agenda.
I can forward something to you though.
Yes, Tracy did have that in the agenda.
It is, yeah.
Okay.
It's updated, yep.
All right.
So just for direction for us, so the the matrix includes when a permit is required, when it's not required. Obviously, there are costs associated with the ones that are required. The village code does have a fee matrix, including a list of all the required permits and what the fees are for them for the percentage. So some of these, I believe all of these are called out. Is that correct? You pulled all of these from that matrix. So a draft ordinance for your consideration would be a bit of an overhaul of that section, modifying that section just so everyone's aware. We did that a year and a half ago, maybe. So it would be a very similar ordinance. So we'll prepare that for consideration, and then there are any things to tweak after that.
Okay.
I just want to get clear, because some of these other, like the footnotes and other requirements, we may have to figure out how those would be incorporated in the code, or those may just be an internal policy that the building department or DCO keeps on file. Because right now we don't specifically call out, auditor says this, unless we have a particular amendment to the adopted building code. So we'll have to figure out if that would make sense to have that placed there, or if it's just an internal policy. But we'll determine.
Yeah, go ahead, Jan.
Can we have for the policy part of it, would it be appropriate for us to do a separate resolution, an ordinance that's going to spell out certain things, a resolution that spells out the policy direction?
Yeah. We'll first see, the permit fees and removing certain requirements, removing certain permits from the code will be easy. The second half, we'll take a look to see if we can fit that in current provisions in the code. If not, we'll come up with a solution to make it, to put it into place.
So we'll study with internally the staff and staff if we remove certain things as that draft shows. Does that change the amendments to the international building code that we're looking to adopt, the 23 and 24 international?
Well, those are just going to exclude.
Or
Yes. So first you have to agree to pass an ordinance on that. Then I'll be able to work with the other aspects of what amendment to the international 23 and 24 building code and plumbing code.
So we're adopting the exclusion.
You possibly will. Yes. Local amendments.
Right. We can either do it at the same time, or you can also indicate that the ordinance on the fees and the permit requirements is effective at a later date, maybe a few months in the future, and that way that'll give fire safety and staff time to adopt, come up with solutions for the rest of that. We'll get to work on it.
Okay. Kim, go ahead.
Yeah, if I may, being a member of CERT and being a big proponent of public safety and overall safety for our citizens and our residents, I'm quite literally going to have to really review this and think about it really hard, because a lot of the reasons we have permits in place is to make sure things are being done right. I wouldn't want to see, because I just want to put it out there that I'm a little concerned about it. I happen to agree with Seth from Fire Safety on some things there. And again, the national code, international code, is a consideration as well.
Good, thank you. Okay, we ready to go on to C? Any other comments? Okay, hiring GIS consultant, S.B. Friedman, for study of possible TIF district for settlements of LaFox.
And I just state that the cost would be one of the escrow reimbursement costs that we would charge the developer. It would be out of our general fund. It'd be reimbursed.
It's not settlements of LaFox.
Well,
I know, we went.
Study area.
Study area.
Okay.
I change that, I guess it didn't make
Okay,
it pretty.
any discussion on that? Yeah, Kim?
Do we have an estimate on the cost? I'm just curious.
Right, so, I think that the,
It's in that.
proposal does indicate it's in 30,000 range, so it's 35. You know, a TIF consultant, if the village is considering one, creating a TIF district, would be heavily recommended. There are different ways that the village can do this. Sometimes the developer provides their own proposal. The village's consultant works on whether or not the district would be feasible, and then the developer has their own consultant as well. Right now, the proposal, because it's in the very preliminary stages, is for the village to obtain the services of S.B. Friedman, which there are really only a few consultants in the state of Illinois. S.B. Friedman is one of the preferred for many municipalities. We've worked with them before. This consultant would review the property, would review what the proposed development is for, and then provide a report to the village based on very specific elements of state statutes that govern the creation and administration of TIF, as to whether or not the land itself and the area would be viable for the creation of TIF. That's the absolute first step. If that can't be answered, then you can't move forward with one. So this limited engagement right now is to prepare that study, to start on that study, prepare that report. If the finding is that it would be possible, then that could start the rest of the process. The developer would prepare his redevelopment plan for the project area, which S.B. Friedman could then be further engaged by the village to review, to determine whether or not it is absolutely necessary, and whether or not that plan is sufficient. So this is just the first step in a multi-layer process.
And we would then have the premier consultant on our side of the table to examine the dollar request from the developer to determine that but for $10 being given, there is no development occurring. And this was partly triggered by our friend in the back corner of the room that's from the Water Reclamation District, when they sent us a letter a month ago saying it could be, they didn't say it would be, $20 to $25 million to revise and upgrade both the water and the sanitary system that is in existence. They're not saying it's going to cost that much, but if it was that much, we would need a TIF or we would not have a development on the proposed area we've been discussing. So it's a good, there's no reason, as I said to the Reclamation District, it was nice that they put that marker down early, because it triggers us to study it to see if this is going to be a viable development. And we're locking in the best consultant on our side of the table to assist us with that request and those numbers, and analyze the developer's numbers and not just sign off on them.
So, and like I said before, the first requirement is that the study is performed. The report has to be prepared, and it's a statutory requirement. The village has someone on staff that is a development related individual that has the credentials, so it's very common for me. It almost always occurs that you have an outside consultant that prepares the report. At this stage, the escrow agreement with the developer allows the village to have its costs for any consulting reimbursed. So that would include, if there is a redevelopment agreement, if the TIF does move forward, any further services by this consultant would be reimbursable from the TIF itself. If this report comes back favorable and the direction is to move forward with the TIF, the next step would be to pass what's called a inducement resolution. It begins the life of the TIF, essentially it begins the process, and allows the village and the developer to be able to look back. So let's say January 1 of the year, a TIF is created, the inducement resolution was passed July 1st of the prior year, any of the expenses incurred that are eligible for reimbursement from the TIF from that July 1st date to that January 1 date could then be reimbursed from the TIF fund when there is an increment available, even though the TIF had not yet been created. So that would be the next step.
Go ahead, Jen.
So most of us on the board were not particularly familiar with this TIF mechanism, and so Administrator Rooney and Attorney Forte had taken some time to explain it when we had questions, and then response had done some additional, research on it. But for the benefit of the public, could you please, Attorney Forte, explain to us how this mechanism works in kind of 3 easy steps?
Sure. In very simple terms, what the TIF does is freezes the EAV, the equalized assessed value, of the property within the four corners of the TIF for a period of 23 years.
Starting with how it is today.
Starting with how it is today.
As agricultural.
Correct.
Literally.
Correct. And then it looks at what the value of EAV of that property would seemingly increase when it is developed over a period of 23 years. The increased tax revenue, that increment is what's called, placed into a TIF fund that is the procedures for which the administration are governed by state statute, but the village administers it. It's often also administered by some consultants as well on behalf of the village. That money can then be it's placed into the fund. It's then frozen for those 23 years to be used for the administration of the TIF. A portion of it can and would be used to reimburse the village's eligible expenses in the creation of the TIF, the ongoing administration of the TIF, engineering fees, legal fees, consultant fees, any infrastructure costs that the village would be required to undertake related to the development that is within the TIF or immediately adjacent to the TIF, servicing the TIF. On the other side of it, the developer then has the ability to submit for in their redevelopment plan and have approved by the village a specific level of eligible expenses for which they can be reimbursed. So when Administrator Rooney talked about the but-for test, essentially it says, but for the creation of the TIF and specific reimbursement of these eligible expenses, the development would not be not just profitable, it just would not be able to occur. In this case, some of the at least preliminarily discussed eligible expenses would be infrastructure related, whether it's sanitary, stormwater related, other infrastructure costs, laying roads. There are even eligible expenses related to the purchase of property. The money itself is somewhat fungible within the plan, but they have to come up with a designated schedule of fees and eligible expenses, which are then reviewed by the TIF consultants to determine whether or not they're reasonable and viable. Sometimes the consultants come back and say, it doesn't have to but-for test. There's enough progress here, or proposed process that it could be developed. Sometimes it's just challenging properties that without a TIF could not be developed. There are different types of TIF: blighted area, conservation areas, greenfield TIF. It's a little bit of a different concept, but the consultants are very familiar with it, so they would perform that study. TIF can close early if all the eligible expenses are paid out beforehand. TIF could close early. A TIF can't be extended past 23 years without specific legislation from the state specific to that TIF, saying that more time is needed than those 23 years. It doesn't happen too often, but it does happen.
But it requires the sign off of like the school district and other taxing bodies. The one thing I think we ought to clarify that you said, but it's inside baseball, the increment is say it's taxed hypothetically at $10. That $10 is spread to the county, to the school district, to the fire district, the library district, the park district, and the village if the village had a property tax, but we don't. Or the township, highway commission, Blackberry or Hanson. So that $10 today, dollars, and then when it becomes say $1 million house, the tax increment change from a $10 tax bill to a $100 tax bill, that $90 delta, that's the increment that is the dollars available to address.
We don't get
It
all of
doesn't,
that.
it does, yeah, we do get all of that increment, and we can utilize it, but when you close the TIF, then you proportionally distribute the remaining surplus dollars back to those taxing bodies. So we don't want to give the impression that the taxes are froze for 23 years. They're froze for the taxing bodies at today's dollar that they're getting of all those entities. And it's over the 23 years, as the pie grows, we are responsible as the village now and the future board on any of that usage of that, but it's governed, and that's why we've had the SB Friedman of the world helping us make sure that we do everything correctly. But that increment would be the tax increases after the development for all those years, and that's why there's money available to be able to meet those infrastructure challenges.
Right, the money's placed into the fund, and with a development like this, and really any significant development that requires a TIF, there would be a redevelopment agreement. It wouldn't just be the annexation agreement and that PUD is saying development. There would be a redevelopment agreement that would designate many developer obligations, village obligations, statutory language, but also the use of the specific funds that are going into the TIF, where they're at least initially directed, and then the remainder of what's available, how they can be used. The school district, and this is just generally speaking, not specific to this project, the school district, the library district have statutory rights to how much they can get from the increment. Sometimes the village then says, okay, after those two districts are satisfied for their yearly tax revenue from the TIF, then the village's expenses are reimbursed. Sometimes in these types of developments, the village has to spend a significant amount of money. Sometimes they have to go out bond for to build some infrastructure, and then the developer's share would be paid off from the remainder over those 23 years. So cut up on a fee schedule. Many different things that can be negotiated in that regard, and there will be a lot of steps, a lot of negotiating with the developer. There's also the joint review board process, which includes the different taxing districts that have a seat at the table and get to chime in on the potential creation of the TIF and the messaging redevelopment agreement before it comes back to the village. So it's a multi-month process. It's not a short process, but this is one of the first steps.
Go ahead, Mike.
You did mention it, Attorney Forte, the grief that I think I've seen over my career and that plays well in Peoria, so to speak, is the school district crying that they have all the new kids and we can't pay for them, which is in a vacuum, not acknowledging that they're getting land cash money for that use. And other taxing districts. So I know in certain cases you approach those bodies and you negotiate with them ahead of time. So we haven't said we're going to or not going to.
No, actually, the school district, we have an agreement that we've already ironed out.
So they're set up for land cash.
They are going to get, I think they've already discussed it 2 Mondays ago at their board meeting,
Okay.
$6.125 million
Okay.
as land cash up front. And then every child that shows up at their doorstep over the 23 years will get $19,588 today, and that will go up by CPI capped at 2% for 23 years.
So that's been addressed.
They've already said they won't object to the TIF if they get
Okay.
X and Y.
So
You'll see that in the agreement.
okay, so that's one of the biggest fights. The second bigger fight, and this is more towards the greenfield ones, is let's not be ignorant of the fact that Sugar Grove exists. And, most of what I've read that got traction is that this isn't a blighted area. As you said, clearly this is a greenfield TIF. That's a different topic. You've explained it, but I think it bears repeating that the abusive TIFs, trustee, how do you phrase it? Trustee Burton phrased it that, it's Chicago, because about the extension of TIFs. The only TIFs that are receiving extended are the city of Chicago, who has a whole bunch of them. But that's the blighted TIF. That's the, if but for, yeah, that's true too. If but for not, or if, but the if but is we didn't invest in the infrastructure, nobody else is going to put their money in this rundown neighborhood. And, you know, going back to my early career when Lombard's downtown looked like junk, passed the TIF, did everything you're supposed to, spruced up the streets, did all stuff, investment happened. The buildings got rehabbed, people did their side, more business came in, that's what it's supposed to do. That's not this. So would you one more time, very carefully, or slowly, not carefully, explain what the but for on the greenfield is?
Well, the but for is kind of a reaction to the Reclamation Water District saying that they could have infrastructure costs in the range of 20 to 25 million. Could, as I said, not would. But we do know there's a capacity there now, but not for 900 units. And if we were going to have a 900 unit development, there's going to have to be an expansion of their water and in their sanitary sewer. So this development would of course have to pay for that, because you wouldn't put it under the existing ratepayers in their district, because why should they pay for something that they don't need to expand? So that is the issue that we'd be addressing on this TIF development. And the school district, they were at the table and negotiated very well for their side of the table, and you can see in their meeting 2 Mondays ago, they sent a draft to us afterwards that they will not object to the TIF if we do A and B, and we're agreeing to do that on the 6.125 and paying. The TIF law states each child that shows up K through 12 gets the dollar amount that they've turned into the Department of Illinois State Education Board, the cost of educating a child in their district, and that we would agree that we would have a CPI capped at 3% for the life of the TIF. So they're taken care of and they feel secured, so they're not objecting. And that's usually how a TIF doesn't get approved, is that the school district feels and makes the case against it. And that's why we negotiated with the school district very much up front. And the other districts have been spoken to and understand they will, during the creation of the TIF, they will have a voice.
And just one quick point, I don't recall if at least the proposed map of the agreement, if you notice, really just incorporates where the residential development is. So, and that's what's outlined in the orange. So, the entirety of the property that is considered for the annexation agreement, it wouldn't be all in the TIF, because the expectation in the agreement, in terms of the agreement, are that property north of the creek, east of frontage, is sold off to open space groups. So, and if it's not part of the development itself, it's not part of the TIF. So,
and since there's no infrastructure needs in open space, there's no reason to include that 440 acres. And that also is a good point, because there's been some concern in the neighbors saying, oh, but the 440 could be built on. Well, if there's no infrastructure dollars in the TIF to help that extraordinary cost of putting a pipe or a bridge across that wetland and that creek, it's going to be pretty hard to ever see any development in that 440 acres. So that is another way to assure the concerns President Wojcicki has stated. We're really doing this to protect that 440, and this TIF is another way to show and demonstrate there's no consideration of development north of the creek or east of the creek as it goes toward frontage, because it's not included in our study area for a TIF.
So to continue the thought, the but-for is how this develops. The counter to that is I don't want it to develop at all. The counter to that is to not have the dense development, which would require no TIF or anything else. It just requires somebody expanding the St. Charles treatment plant, which, you know, could it still could it happen? So I think we have a little different of the normal but-for. We're talking about get it developed in the way we want, including protecting open space. Okay.
Right, because the alternative is, for an increase in profit to make the project viable, you have to severely increase
The density.
again, I'm just using the term severely, but you would have to increase the unit count significantly to raise them up.
And that's why the Pulte subdivision consideration at St. Charles a year ago, or 9 months ago, had 2,200 to 2,400 units, because they had to have that many unit count to make enough profit for the developer to pay impact type numbers for the water and sewer to be extended and other items. So, again, this is a tool for us to get 900 unit count, preserve open space, and it's another way to demonstrate to the skeptical public that the land north and east of that waterway is not going to be built on.
Frank, go ahead.
Yeah, so I had a question. I would kind of rewind to the very beginning about who's paying for what. So originally, we talked about the developer covering expenses, and if I heard it correctly, and I may not have, eventually that rolls into maybe the TIF paying for some of that. So let's start with the $30,000 it may take to do the study, and you said the developer pays for that.
Under our
And I heard
escrow
that correct? Okay, so under the escrow agreement, the developer would pay the $30,000 to do that. So can you explain then, as we go, what's the developer responsible for, what's the TIF responsible for? I mean, is there a breakdown of that somehow? That's the part I'm struggling with.
Right.
It's a timing issue too.
Right, so the escrow agreement, the escrow provisions in the village code, which we're operating under right now, that the developer has agreed to and signed off on, requires the village to make the initial payment for the cost, but then to reimburse itself from the escrow that the developer would continue